Well, good afternoon, folks. And of course, greetings to you folks who may listen to this later on the CD. I don't think I have to tell you folks here, or you folks out there, for the most part, that our nation is going downhill fast. We have a do-nothing Congress. Our president is shifted into neutral. And our government has become totally dysfunctional. And our little piece of the world is going downhill like a bull on ice. But whose fault is it? When the cards are all spread, who is it that must take responsibility for the unbraiding of our nation? Whose fault is it that our southern borders are wide open? Wide open to the tons of illegal drugs, illegal immigrants who are taxing our social services, our school systems, our medical the hospitals and so forth, because they are coming in with diseases, all kinds of diseases, and they are taxing all this to death. They're also cutting into the job market of American citizens. Of course, it's a job market which American citizens doesn't want, but nevertheless they are. And why is the border open to any terrorist who wants to walk across? Whose fault is it that we have all these scandals in our government? The IRS scandal, the VA scandal, and all this Obamacare mess, which is going to cause more harm than good to our health care system. Why have almost one-half of our states endorsed same-sex marriage and homosexuality as being the normal thing to do? Why do we have a national law that says we can legally murder the most helpless of our citizens through abortion? Why has our large cities become a cesspool of murderers, rapists, thieves, drug dealers, and people who have become helpless addicts? Why can people who have good educations not find meaningful employment? Why are the rest of the nations thumbing their nose at us? Why have we become the drag of a nation that we've become? Why is that? Is it the fault of Congress? Is it the sole fault of the president? Is it the fault of our judicial system and the Supreme Court? Or does the cause lie within our state and federal educational systems? I want us to take a look at the preamble of our Constitution. The preamble of the Constitution is an introductory, succinct, my tongue wasn't right there. Or, it's a statement, a few words, describing the overall principles, rights, powers, described in the full text of the document. It's an overview, you might say, of what the Constitution is supposed to be all about. It says, we the people, and I want you to remember that as we go along here. I will use this phrase throughout my sermon today as referring to God's people, which He formed as a nation from the time He brought them out of Egypt to this very day. The preamble says, quote, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And then, of course, you have the Constitution. But that tells us what it's supposed to be, an overview of what it's supposed to be about. Now, I have no doubt the Founding Fathers had good and honorable intentions when they drew up this document. They believed in what they were doing so strongly they were willing to die for it, and many of them did die for it. And many and tens of thousands, upon tens of thousands, have died for it over the years. But our Constitution, it has become something which is not what it was in the beginning. It's been amended so many times, and amendments have been added to those amendments, and amendments to those amendments. Our Constitution today does not even hardly look like the original document that these people drew up. But these people, the Founding Fathers, they had been oppressed by the government of King George and by the forced will of the Church of England, which was a church of the state. And if you openly expressed anything other than what the church taught, you were subject to be hanged or burned at the stake if you didn't believe what they taught. Now, I'm reasonably sure the Church of England was not a true church of God. And I'm reasonably sure they did not teach the true teachings of God or of Christ. For if they had, they wouldn't have been trying to force their will upon people by the threat of death. They were a political church which worked hand in hand with the government. And we see that with the Roman Catholic Church. Eventually, in the end, they're going to work hand in hand with the government to bring their will about. And that's why many people left that nation and came to the New World, that they might have the freedom to worship God the way they saw fit. Although the Church of England was not a true church of God, many of the people who came to the New World, who formed church organizations, were not true churches of God either. They weren't true churches any more than the system that they were fleeing. The point being, we the people have always wanted to worship God or not to worship God as we see fit, regardless of what He has to say about it. That has always been an Israelite characteristic. However, this nation was formed on a belief in God and the godly principle that men should be free from oppression and have the right to be free from that oppression. And that is a godly principle, for God does not oppress humanity. God gives us the freedom to choose for ourselves whether we will do right or whether we will do wrong. The first two humans which God created had that freedom. Of course, they chose wrong, and humanity has suffered for it ever since. God gave the Israelites that choice when He brought them out of the land of Egypt. He gave them the choice to follow Him, which is the way of freedom, or follow the ways of the world, which are of Satan's, the way of oppression. In the book of Exodus, we read the story of how they were enslaved by the Egyptians and how the Lord tried to give them freedom from oppression. He tried to give them freedom and give them a good life in the promised land. But they didn't want freedom. They couldn't understand freedom. They always wanted to go back to the land of Egypt or the land of oppression. And you know, we the people still have that mindset today to one degree or the other. Many people would rather have someone else tell them what to do, with one exception. Don't put God in the equation. Don't put him in there. We'll listen to anyone else but God, for this relieves them of any spiritual responsibility. And no one, it seems, wants any responsibility, spiritually or otherwise. And we see this in our government system today. Everybody is always trying to pin the blame on someone else. They're up there, the Democrats, Republicans, they're fighting back and forth as to what is good for their party, not what is good for the people overall. Everybody is always trying to blame someone else for the shape we're in as a nation. But whose fault is it? Is it the Republicans' fault? Is it the Democrats' fault? Is it Congress's fault? Is it the fault of the religious community? Is it the fault of the press? Is it the father's fault? Is it the mother's fault? And the poor old dog gets blamed for eating the homework when we don't do what our teacher tells us to do. In fact, it is we, the people's fault, for the shape that we're in, and I'll explain that. It is this burning desire to rule ourselves by our own intuition, to rule ourselves by our own perception of what is truth and what is not, rather than to accept the rule of the all-knowing, almighty God, which of course has brought us as a nation to the point in which we live today. Not that God has brought us there, but we have brought ourselves there. But let's go back to the preamble again. First says, quote, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." In other words, we the people are going to rule ourselves. That's what that's saying. We the people are going to rule ourselves in order to form a more perfect government. A more perfect government from what? Well, in their minds, it was a more perfect government from the one that they had just came out of, the one that they had fought and won their independence from. It was the government of King George and the Church of England. But where did this idea come from? The idea of governing ourselves and being under human leadership rather than the leadership of God. Turn to the book of 1 Samuel. Now, I've used this scripture more than once in sermons, but let's read it again. For it tells us the problems that arise from the desire for human leadership. And it's this desire which has plagued us all the way down to this very day in the 21st century. Right here is where it mostly began. And I say mostly because they had had problems years before, but this is mostly where it began. 1 Samuel 8, starting in verse 1. And it came to pass, when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of the firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second, Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, and turned aside after money, and took bribes, and perverted justice. Now, just like many judges today, they took bribes and they perverted justice. Whoever could pay for it got the favorable ruling. Verse 4. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, you are old, your sons walk not in your ways. Make us a king to judge us like all the nations. You're getting old, Samuel. You're not up to snuff anymore. You're not up to the job. And your sons are a bunch of crooks. So make us a king to judge us. Now, I've also mentioned before, at first this might seem like a legitimate request from the people. But in verse 6 and 7, the Lord told Samuel, "They have not rejected you, but they have rejected me. And folks, when you reject the leadership of God, then you have sinned." Simple as that. So what have we, the people, done in choosing a form of government in which we try to rule ourselves? Or to have a say-so in who rules over us. For in doing so, we too also have sinned in our rejection of God and our leadership as Him being our supreme ruler. You who are fathers, who have children, you have raised your children to the best of your abilities. You've given up maybe everything for your children. You have sacrificed to give your children a good education and all the things they need to get a good start in life. And yet they turn out to be a bad egg sometimes. They reject you and all the good things you have done for them. And it hurts you. And it brings you grief to see that happen, does it not? Well, God has feelings too, people. Some of us who have been married and gave our all to the marriage only to eventually be rejected knows those feelings as well. So, now hold your place here in 1 Samuel. We'll be back in just a minute. But let's go to Ezekiel 16. Ezekiel 16, starting in verse 1. This is how we, the people, Israel, as a nation, got our start. It says, "The word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, cause Jerusalem to know her abominations. Make them known to her. And say, Thus says the Lord God unto Jerusalem." He says, your birth, this is our beginning we're reading about here. Your birth and your nativity is of the land of Canaan. Your father was an Amorite and your mother was a Hittite. Now, I don't know if that's actually true or metaphorically speaking. However, God says, saying to Israel here, you are of a mixed race. The children of a mixed race, people, have always been looked down upon and frowned upon, even though it's not their fault. We can't choose who our parents are. When I was growing up in Southwest Virginia, if a black man and a white woman had a child, or vice versa, had a child, that child was frowned upon, especially if they weren't married and called all kinds of obscene names. I personally never had a problem with that, but a lot of people did. For the child, as I said, could not help who his parents are. The same was true in the early western frontier. If a white man and an Indian woman had a child, or again, vice versa, they were called half-breeds and a lot of other unmentionable names and were treated very poorly. And this is what God is saying we were. This was our beginning. Verse 4. Therefore, see, and as for your nativity, And the day you were born, your navel was not cut, nor tied, I might add. Neither was you washed in water to supple you. You was not salted at all, nor swaddled at all. Now, Mr. Trent gave a sermon recently about all the uses of salt. Well, here's another one. Here's another one. I looked this up one time, and it's seemingly people of olden times would wash their newborn babies in warm salt water to kill any bacteria which they might have encountered during the birthing process. God says nobody did this for us. Verse 5, he said, no eye pitied you to do any of these things unto you. No eye pitied you, like all children of a mixed race, to have compassion upon you, but you was cast out in the open field to the loathing of your person in the day that you was born. It's like a newborn being thrown out in the garbage heap today. We were just a nation or people just thrown out. Everybody looked down on us. We were cast away, so to speak, to die. God says, when I passed by you, I saw you polluted in your own blood. I said unto you, when you was in your own blood or filth, live. Yea, I said unto you, when you was in your blood, live. God says, in our beginning, when our parents had thrown us out to die like a piece of garbage, we would have ceased to exist. We would never have had the opportunity to live to begin with unless that he did something for us. But in verse 7, what he said, live, he said, I have caused you to multiply as the bud of the field. And you have increased and waxen great. And you have come to excellent ornaments, or you have come to be an ornament above all other ornaments. He said your breasts were fashioned, or you grew up, you began to grow up. And your hair is grown, whereas before you were naked and bare. Let's see. Verse 8. He said, when I passed by you, I looked upon you. Behold, the time was the time of love. And I spread my skirt over you and covered your nakedness, and I swore unto you and entered into a covenant with you, said the Lord God, and you became mine. God said, when you grew up and the time was right, I married you. I went into a covenant with you. And you can read about that in Exodus chapter 20 and 24. Verse 9. He says, then washed I thee with water, yea, I thoroughly washed away the blood from you, and I anointed you with oil. I clothed you also with broidered work, and shod you with badger skins, and I girded you about with fine linen, and I covered you with silk. God's saying, this is what some of the things I did for you when I married you and made you mine. He said, I decked you with ornaments, and I put bracelets upon your hand, and a chain on your neck. And I put a jewel in your forehead, and earrings in your ears, and a beautiful crown upon your head. Thus were you decked with gold and silver. In other words, we were richer than all the other nations. And your raiment was of fine linen and silk and broidered work. And you did eat fine flour. You had good food to eat, and plenty of it, and honey and oil. And you was exceedingly beautiful, and you did prosper into a kingdom. And your renown went forth among the heathen for your beauty, for it was perfect through my comeliness, which I had put upon you, says the Lord God. All this is true. At one time we were the most shining example of any nation on the earth, but not anymore. Verse 15, he says, but you trusted in your beauty, and you played the harlot because of your renown, and poured out your fornications on every one that passed by. His it was. And I don't think I have to explain that. But that's the way Satan was. His beauty caused him to go wrong. And that's what we are. I wish I had time to go through this entire chapter with you, but it's a rather lengthy chapter, and we don't have time to do that, so I'll just touch on some of the high spots here and paraphrase a little bit. God tells them, he says, you've taken the beautiful garments I gave you, and you decked the high places with them, and you played the harlot thereupon. He says, you took my silver and my gold and made images of men and committed whoredom with them. He said, you have taken the fine flour, the honey, the oil, and all the good food I fed you with, and have offered these to the idols. He said, you've slain the children and sacrificed them to the idols. You've put your children on an altar and burnt them alive to your idols. Now, you probably won't see that today, but we've killed tens of thousands in the abortion process, so what's the difference? Verse 25 tells us our actions have made us to be abhorred, and that we have opened our feet to everyone who passes by. And I don't have to explain that to you either. But God is referring to us as a whorish woman. And I don't mean to embarrass anybody, but I didn't make this up. God said it right here. Verse 26, 28, and 29. We have committed fornication with the Egyptians, he says, the Syrians, the people of Canaan and Chaldea, which is part of the old empire of which the Iranians are a part of today. God says in verse 30, how weak is your heart? How weak is your heart? Seeing that you do all these things, the work of an imperish, whorish woman. Unlike many prostitutes who receives gifts and money for their services, we give money to the people that come in unto us. Just the opposite. And there's a good example of that going on right now. We are now giving the Iranians millions of dollars just to get them to come and sit down and talk to us about the bomb that they're trying to create. They're going to take the money, people, and still build the bomb. But we're so stupid we can't see that. Our leaders can't see that. Don't understand that. As you read on through this chapter, God says what we are doing is a small thing as compared to Sodom and Samaria. He says that they haven't committed half the sins that we have. And, folks, he's going to punish us for it. But that's what we, the people, are going to receive for choosing a human form of government to rule over us. God told them what they would receive. He told them how it would be, but they wanted a king anyway. Now, there's a temptation among a lot of people to think God has put his stamp of approval on the Constitution of the United States and our system of democracy. But God's form of government is not a democracy. When Jesus comes back to this earth to establish his kingdom, we the people are not going to have a say-so in how that government is run and who runs it, nor the laws either that we will be living under. However, Christ's government will be for the people, but it is not by the people. Now back to Samuel, where we were there. Verse 8 here in Samuel 1. It says, according to all your works, according to all the works which they have done since the day I brought them out of the land of Egypt, even unto this day, and yes, even unto this day that we're here, folks, wherein they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto you, Samuel. In verse 9, God tells Samuel to hearken to their voice, but tell them what kind of government they will be living under when they have a king or a head of state ruling over them. Verse 11, and he said, this will be the manner of king that shall reign over you. He shall take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots. God says, I'm not going to fight for you anymore. The king or your head of state will impose a draft and take your young men to do the fighting, and many of the young men will die. Many will be killed in the process. Verse 12. And he will appoint to him captains over thousands and captains over 50s, and will set them to ear his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war or armaments, and instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries, be cooks and bakers, and he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the 10th of your seed, I wish it was a 10th today, and of your vineyards, and give to his officers and to his servants. You know, he's saying it's going to take a lot of food to feed this great army your king is going to set up. And you, the people, are going to have to pay for it. I'm not going to go out and fight for you anymore. You, the people, are going to have to fight for yourselves, and you, the people, are going to have to fund it. Verse 16 and 17. And he will take your men servants, your maid servants, your goodly young men, your asses, and put them to his work. And he will take the 10th of your sheep, and you shall be his servants. He's going to tax you to death, is what God is trying to tell him. And you will become servants to the king and his system of government. Now, I have a question. How do you people feel here today? How do you people feel out there? Do you feel you are a servant to the government? How do you feel? When you pay almost 50% of your earnings to support the function of your government, how else could you feel? What else are you but a servant of the government? Statistics prove that what you're buying in obvious and hidden taxes, almost 50% of your earned income goes to the government in some form or other in your federal and local taxes. Verse 18. And you shall cry out in that day because of your king, which you have chosen, and the Lord will not hear you. Will not hear you on that day. The Lord says, I will not hear you, because you have chosen human leadership over me. You have rejected me, and you have sinned in doing so. Nevertheless, although the people rejected the leadership of God as being their supreme leader, God still tried to find for them the best man he could. In the beginning, of course, we know he chose Saul. Saul, in the beginning, was an humble man. Saul actually received the Spirit of God. And you can read about that in chapter 10, verse 9. But we also know it didn't take long before he became corrupt, because he didn't use the Spirit of God. He didn't follow what the Spirit was trying to tell him. He didn't let the Spirit lead him. And although democracy is not God's form of government, I personally and firmly believe that when this nation was founded, God also chose the best possible men he could find at that time to get this nation started. For of necessity, this nation had to be formed right before the end time. For God had to fulfill his promise to Abraham. So we had this nation of necessity was formed. Like Saul's government, it may have started out on the right track in the beginning, but look at us now. Just look at the corruption that exists in our government today. Although we, the people, chose to have a human form of government, even when that government chose to incorporate the laws of God into its system, they still prospered. God was lenient enough to still prosper them as long as they incorporated his laws into their human government. When they didn't, they spiraled into a miserable condition. When they had a good head of state who incorporated God's laws into his government, they were blessed. Bad kings, the blessings were withdrawn. Where are we today? And again, whose fault is it? For hundreds of years, after requesting that first human king, God's people, as a nation, were ruled over by a king. Some good, some bad. Mostly bad. Until God finally got so disgusted with them, he scattered them to the four winds. And they ceased to be a nation at all. Then we see the nation of England come on the scene. And for those of you who may not know who the modern-day Israelites are, then you can contact this church for that information by the address or phone number on this CD. We see some of the so-called lost tribes of Israel forming a nation, and they also had humans or human kings ruling over them. And you know, even at that late date, these kings were still taxing them to death, putting their young men in the military, and taking from them what they deemed to be their God-given liberties by forcing them to belong to a church-run state and depriving them of religious freedom. So they finally, after hundreds of years, decided this human king thing wasn't working too good either. Wasn't a good idea after all. So they came up with the idea that instead of a king ruling over us, we, the people, will rule ourselves. So let's read the preamble one more time. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Now, these things which we just read are what the Constitution is supposed to be about. Now, to ensure domestic tranquility, there must of necessity be rules and laws to abide by. Everybody, a whole community of people, can't go around doing anything and everything which crosses their mind. If they do, then what transpires is total anarchy or total lawlessness. And it's up to we the people to see that this doesn't happen. And how successful have we been? How successful have we been? But how does this work? I mean, everybody can't go around and voice their opinions and wants, likes, dislikes, and before the governing and lawmaking body of the land. And of necessity, there must be a governing and lawmaking body, and even means to uphold those laws in order to ensure our domestic tranquility. You know, to keep all the thieves and the crooks out of your houses and businesses, our banks and financial institutions, keep the drunks and drug addicts off the roads, and stop all the substance abuse. And we're doing such a fine job. We're doing such a fine job. For there are more crooks in our businesses, banks, and financial institutions than anywhere else. And we can't all go around and provide for our common defense, can we? We can't all go down to the border, build a fence, or in a barricade to stop all the drug smuggling and to prevent terrorists from entering into our country. We can't all do that. We can't all promote the general welfare of everyone else, although that is one area that we could do better in. It's called loving your brother as yourself. We can't all secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And I'm talking about our posterity, not the posterity of the South American people and the rest of the people in the world. But how does this work? Well, we elect representatives to take our wishes and our grievances to the higher level or the ruling level of government. And of course, they always represent our good intentions. And it's always the majority. It's always what the majority wants, right? Har, har. It's supposed to be that way, but it hardly ever is. It's the people who cry and yell and scream long enough and loud enough that gets their wishes represented. It's always the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. The good wheels are never paid any attention to. But we, the people, we have let it happen. This is our form of government. This is what we get by we, the people, ruling ourselves. Our representatives are supposed to represent everybody who are supposed to represent everybody, hardly ever represents the good and honorable. They represent the absurd and the dishonorable, and pass laws which uphold the criminals rather than the innocent. And what are these true blessings of liberty that the preamble mentions? Does the true blessings or law of liberty give us the freedom to worship God any way we choose, to believe in the parts of the Bible which are convenient and throw the rest away? Does the true blessings of liberty give us the right to disregard God altogether, if that's what we choose to do? To take the knowledge of His very existence out of our educational systems and disregard all laws in the teaching of our children, all His laws? Is that what the Founding Fathers meant by separation of church and state? I don't think so. But that's how it is, that's how we the people have interpreted today in order to get God out of our educational systems. Their intention was the state would have no say-so in people's religious beliefs, that the state could not force its view on religion to the community as a whole. Not that the existence of God should not be taught. The intent of the separation of church and state was to prevent themselves from going back under the same old form of government of which they came out of. Not that we should expel God from the educational system, but that is what we, the people, have come to do, because that's what we, the people, want. And God has been replaced by science. The spiritual has been replaced by the physical. Does the true blessings of liberty give us the leeway to go the way of Sodom and Gomorrah, if that's our choice? And if not, what is meant by the true blessings of liberty or the law of liberty? James 1:25 tells us, says, "But whoso looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed." So again, what is the blessings of liberty? It is to do the work of God, to live by the laws and commandments of God, to make God our supreme authority in what is right and what is wrong. True liberty is to come out of this world, quit doing and thinking like the world does, and that is what we in the church are supposed to be doing. We are to accept God as the true supreme leader in our lives, to let Him lead us in what is right. That's why He admonishes us to come out of the ways of this world in Revelation 8:14, and not to partake of this world's sins, for we, the people, are not capable of self-rule. And there's many scriptures in the Bible that allude to that, but I don't have time to go to them today. We, the people, are not capable of self-rule. And to have that desire, as we have already seen, is a sin and will only lead us into the ways of Sodom. And my friends, we, the people, are there. We are there. So real, true liberty is to become a spirit being. Then we, under Christ, can dispose of all these man-made governments, which can never work and bring true happiness and peace in this world to start with. We, under Christ, being born into His family as kings and priests, is something which we, that is the only way that we can bring true happiness and peace to this world. We, the people, can never accomplish that on our own, nor did God ever intend for us to do that. I'm going to stop right there. I just want to, all that being said, I don't want people to think that I don't appreciate being born in the United States, for I certainly do. And I appreciate all the blessings that Abraham has bestowed on this country. But we, the people, have destroyed and misused and abused what God has gave us. But I'll talk about that in my next sermon.